प्रसार भारती अभिलेखागार की प्रस्तुति सदाबहार सुनहरे दौर का अनमोल खजाना।
Hello. Somehow, the development of cinema seems to be always tied up with wars and conflict. The Second World War brought about yet another peculiar phenomenon in the history of Europe. A new political entity was formed, and it was called the Eastern European Bloc by Big Brother Stalin and his Soviet Union. The Soviet Union decided all the economic policies for the combined bloc, which included nations like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, the GDR, Romania, and Bulgaria. Ironically, these nations did not have much of a film history to fall back upon in order to face modern contradictions. So, under the Stalinist regime, all policies vis-a-vis the arts were simply handed down by the Soviets. Promptly, two major film schools were set up, one at Prague called the FAMU in 1947, and a year later the Polish school came up in Lodz. For the first time, the whole world came to know of film industries being completely funded by the government. Scripts and proposals approved by political committees. And yet, the kind of artistic talent that flourished here was unimaginable. Within just 4 years, the Polish Film School introduced some of the most important major talents in the world cinema. Filmmakers like Jerzy Kawalerowicz, Andrzej Munk, and Andrzej Wajda blazed festival screens and proved what state funding and policy could really produce. Coincidentally, in 1953, something happened which got all the people of the East European bloc to breathe a heavy sigh of relief. Stalin was dead. And within a few months, a strong de-Stalinization movement began. The whole Eastern European bloc decided en masse to reveal all the atrocities that he had committed and to usher in a new era of artistic freedom. Symbolically, many of the films kept dealing with the horrors of the Second World War and the strange sacrifices that people were called upon to make. Andrzej Wajda's Ashes and Diamonds was one of them. Though this was a favorite subject as far as the political line was concerned, the filmmakers did not merely exploit it for administrative reasons. These films had a deep current of cynicism, a feeling that merely winning over the fascist forces could never be an end in itself. Ashes and Diamonds depicts a few hours in the life of a young resistance fighter who does not have much of a political commitment, and yet he is assigned a mission to kill. But when he encounters his victim, he realizes that he is a kindly old man. Reluctantly, he carries out his orders, but he is trapped in a reprisal and killed. Is it a statement that violent heroism can never seek a true happy end? When a society does not question the very origins of social strife and yet goes ahead with a policy of annihilation, the results can never be successful, even if you believe that you are on the right side.
Leci! No czekaj!
The 60s were not a very comfortable period for the young Polish filmmakers. Relationship between the artists and the government bureaucrats were really strained because it was really difficult to bring down the edifice that was laid down by Stalinist policies. So, artists often went for stories in the Second World War. The Germans and their officers were almost metaphorical representatives of the socialist bureaucracy. But it was not so for Andrzej Wajda, especially in his film called Man of Marble.
W porządku. No, a teraz do baraku. Gdzie? Do baraku.
A czego?
No przecież nie będę ich kręcił, jak wychodzą z biura. Puszczajcie ludzi. No, szybciej.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Puszczajcie ludzi!
Halo, halo, tu służba sprawozdawcza Polskiego Radia, zainstalowana na budowie osiedla mieszkaniowego Nowa Huta. Drodzy słuchacze, znajdujemy się na terenie największej budowy planu sześcioletniego. Tutaj, na polach podkrakowskich, powstaje wielki kombinat Nowa Huta i miasto, które pomieści w niedalekiej...
In this film, Wajda launches a scathing attack on the policies launched by Poland's authorities, at the same time careful enough not to make it too personal. The fact that the main story revolved around a filmmaker in search of his father called Birkut, who was a farmer, helped the story move on objective lines.
Nie. O, energicznie idziecie. Śmielej. Swobodniej. Bardziej po robociarsku. Pan Birkut idzie dobrze. Ale wy za sztywno. Stop. Nie to. Wracamy jeszcze raz. Powtarzamy to.
Pięcioosobowa brygada Mateusza Birkuta podjęła się ułożenia 28 000 cegieł w ciągu jednej zmiany. Za chwilę będziemy świadkami tego niezwykłego wydarzenia. Dzięki inicjatywie Mateusza Birkuta w tym pięcioosobowym zespole jeden fachowiec murarz kładzie tylko zewnętrzną warstwę cegieł, kierując pracą pozostałej czwórki, wykonującej wszystkie pozostałe czynności. Uwaga! Murarz pracujący dawniej metodą...
This film was very successful in Poland, and the Polish authorities could not curb Wajda's critical faculties. Several years later, Wajda was to associate with rebel leader Lech Wałęsa and even foretell the Great Collapse. Close on the heels of Andrzej Wajda was yet another consummate filmmaker. He was to emigrate soon out of Poland and become an international celebrity. His name was Roman Polanski. His scriptwriter, Jerzy Skolimowski, and the famous film was called Knife in the Water.
Kto się trzyma, boi!
The unusual thing about the duo was that they were not the types to blame their elder generation, as was the fashion in those days, for all the problems that the nation suffered due to the Second World War. For them, the crisis was present in the mental attitudes of the younger generation too, as emphasized in this dramatic triangle of a husband, his wife, and a stranger.
Utopiłeś człowieka.
The dilemma of knife in the water is epitomized in the heroine trapped between the two selfish men, who are of course portrayed in extreme situations, with the civilized veneer of human relations carefully stripped away.
Głębiej.
To co mam robić?
Skacz jeszcze raz. Trzeba krzyczeć. Zawiadomić milicję.
Po co? Nie wiadomo kto to był. Uratują go?
Widzisz? Sam mówisz, że utonął. Utopiłeś chłopaka. Już się tego nie da cofnąć. Zabiłeś go!
Przestań krzyczeć!
Zostaw! Jesteś mordercą.
Zamknij się.
Już się boisz, trzęsiesz się ze strachu. Już nawet nie starasz się zachować twarzy. Twardy facet. Pozer jesteś, rozumiesz? Kabotyn. Przed chłopcem.
If Polanski focused on the wayward and criminal tendencies of the younger generation, then there was another young director who was to focus his guns on the scientific community of Poland. His name was Krzysztof Zanussi, and the film was called Structure of Crystals.
6 tygodni za sam zeszły rok.
Here, he uses the particular dilemma of careers in science to investigate general philosophic issues.
Wyobrażasz sobie,
This film compares the divergent careers of two old friends, one of whom has joined the successful elite in the city, while the other is relegated to a thankless job in a remote weather station.
Wydawało mi się, że tak strasznie dużo mam ci do powiedzenia, a teraz jak przyjechałeś, siedzimy tutaj, ja nic nie mówię.
Idziesz? Idziesz, jeszcze ci poszukam. Chcesz? No. Jeszcze ci poszukam.
Zanussi's strong comment on the growing materialist and the consumerist aspects of Poland was indeed a strong portender of what lay in store for the country's future.
Oglądałeś telewizję kolorową? O, to jest...
It was indeed a great struggle for filmmakers like Wajda, Polanski and Zanussi to continue to remain as iconoclastic figures of modern Polish cinema. But this kind of an opportunity seems to have come on a platter to a filmmaker called Miklós Jancsó in Hungary. Here, the Politburo launched itself on a strong anti-Stalinist campaign. So Miklós Jancsó took this stand to its most poetic limits. Strongly rooted in the modern theatrical tradition of Brecht and Grotowski, he set upon cinema like the way a painter would treat a landscape. And one of his most outstanding works till date remains this work called Roundup. He staged all his choreographed mise-en-scène on an open landscape and reversed the entire montage principle of Eisenstein to devise a series of sutures into a long take. With his first black and white experiments, as we see here in Roundup, to his brilliant color world like Confrontation and Red Psalm, he established himself as a master who used montage within a united temporal plane, a unique experiment which inspired filmmakers all over the world to try similar experiments.
Én öltem meg őket.
Roundup should be seen within the context of the strong anti-Stalinist policy that was followed by the Hungarian government in the early 70s. Authors and artists here were called upon to highlight this theme, and Jancsó, instead of creating a piece of propaganda, decides to turn the film into a highly energetic exercise of contrasting spaces.
Ezeken kívül nem ölt meg másokat is.
Hát kérem, öltem. De nem sokat.
Kiket? Miket? Megmondaná? Könnyít a lelkén, meg talán könnyebb lesz a sorsa addig is.
Hát kérem, öltem. Ezeken kívül még 3 embert.
3?
Igen. 61-ben Telkes Gábort, 2 évre rá Ceder Palkó Jánost, aztán 66-ban, nem, 67-ben Csulak Ferit. Ez a Csulak Feri...
Nem kell. Tudjuk, ki volt Csulak Feri.
Aztán nem is számít, hogy eltettem.
Talán. Nem tudom.
Other filmmakers like Marta Mészáros, Zoltán Fabry, István Gál introduced Hungary as a filmic nation to reckon with. If the list of the great Hungarian masters is endless, so too would be the list of the Czechoslovakians. Czechoslovakia, however, had a bit of film history, but compared to Europe and India, of course, it would be negligible. This nation hit headlines when the Soviet tanks rolled into Prague. The national outrage that it provoked garnered a whole new generation of young filmmakers. Starting with Milos Forman and Jiří Menzel, these filmmakers developed a whole new style of filmmaking, which at the surface level was very cool, romantic and positive. But underneath that veil was a very strong comment on the ways of the bureaucracy and the oppressive state. In Closely Guarded Trains, Jiří Menzel introduces a unique style combining the light comedy tradition of Hollywood's Frank Capra and George Cukor, the spontaneity of the French avant-garde, and the political clarity of the neorealists.
No prosím. Není to zločin omezování osobní svobody.
Working with non-actors and cameramen who specialized in soft focus photography almost to the point of making it an obsession, Closely Guarded Trains remains today as the perfect story dealing with male potency and its relationship with rigid bureaucracy. The study of sexuality interlinked with concepts of politics was also an important study to emerge in that period. Anyone seeing Closely Guarded Trains will never forget the warmth and compassion with which all characters are dealt with, be they socialists or be they Nazis. But the one who flew over the cuckoo's nest in Czechoslovakia was Milos Forman. Before becoming an international celebrity all over the world, he directed a film which is still remembered for its highly spontaneous and documentary quality. A Blonde's Love, made in 1965, addressed issues of freedom and individuality, socialism and responsibility in a unique, untempered style. Another unusual East European nation to come up with some outstanding works was Yugoslavia. And in Dusan Makavejev, we have one of the most significant filmmakers here.
Hello?
vezu za mursku sobotu. A radimo, koleginice, radimo. Kragujevac neka pričeka, imam 3 eklera iz Hrvatske. Alo?
In this peculiar film called The Tragedy of a Switchboard Operator, his particular contribution to the expressive potentialities of modern cinema has been the development of a complicated collage method. The juxtaposition of heterogeneous materials to produce complex ironies and ambiguities.
More da znaš kako brat vozi.
A sufren vozač abisinske ambasade, čed do Crne Afrike, afrički stil, sestro, bio vitez, mamen.
Well, friends, at the end of the screening, we may never really know the tragedy of the switchboard operator. But we all know the tragedy that has befallen the nation that produced this film. Yugoslavia today is torn by communal conflicts and ethnic wars, as we have seen today in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The idealism perpetuated by a state-run policy has crashed, giving way to opportunism, crime, and disillusionment. A similar tragedy has also fallen on the neighboring East European nations, whose films we admired strongly in those days. Today, their films are but a pale shadow of the glorious days of the 60s and 70s. Will they ever stage a comeback? Well, let's hope so. Until then, goodbye.